Welcome to my podcast, The Government Mechanic. I am your host, Dr. Lynn Sandra Kahn, and I am the Government Mechanic. This is episode 7 that we've titled, Do You Know Where Your Hamburger Comes From? And it is the third in 4 episodes that we're doing about the food supply system here in America. My very accomplished and talented guest today is Marty Irby, who is the director of the Organization for Competitive Markets based in Lincoln, Nebraska. And today he's with us from Washington, D.C. Hi, Marty.
Hey, Lynn, so great to be here with you all today and really appreciate the opportunity to discuss these issues.
Absolutely. Let me give a brief introduction. Marty Irby was born in southern Alabama. I was born in the Bronx. Marty was born in southern Alabama, grew up on a farm with horses, cattle, and other animals. Flash forward to 2024, he is a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and I've learned so much about him. When I tried to figure out how to introduce you, I had to read through pages and pages of your accomplishments. For example, Marty Irby helped pass 42 different federal and state laws, including the Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act, the Horseracing Integrity and Safety Act, Pause for Veterans Therapy Act, and on and on. So I have 2 wonky questions for you about concentration in the food system and the agencies that make food policy. But first, I have to ask you about your 2021 documentary film where you looked at how wild horses in America are being eradicated from federal lands. Please tell us about your documentary.
Well, it was a terrific piece. It's actually, I think, still out on Amazon Prime and some of the other platforms. Wild Beauty, Mustang Spirit of the West. The producer and director is my dear close friend, Ashley Avis. She actually produced Disney's Black Beauty that was like 2020, I believe, and learned about the wild horses and their plight because they actually utilized those horses in Wild Beauty. Terrific film, but basically because of the beef checkoff in many instances and certain people who are able to lease federal lands at a cheap price, they're running the horses off the land, slaughtering them, and ultimately decimating the herds just so people can raise cheap beef out on federal lands. And it's a terrible plight. It's all connected to what we're going to talk about today. And hope you guys will check that out on, again, Amazon Prime and other platforms that are out there. Wild Beauty, Mustang Spirit of the West.
And I think it's wonderful to start our conversation by talking about wild horses and what you've done to help. You've also written a lot about concentration in the food industry, how a very few companies are monopolizing food production and distribution across the board. Can you explain that, basically, what it means to the average consumer?
It does. It's primarily in the area that we don't really think about so much, but it's meat at the end of the day. There are 4 big packers. You have Smithfield, which actually is owned by the Chinese and was purchased with a loan financed by the Chinese Communist Party in 2013. Then you have JBS, which is Brazil-based, and the Batista brothers, they're involved. You could just Google them and see about their prison record. And then you have Tyson, and then you have Cargill. Those are 2 American companies. I see representatives from all these organizations on Capitol Hill regularly. They're a big lobby. They're a powerful lobby. I call them the global meat cartel, and I have no qualms about calling them that because they control your and our food supply, and they are a threat to our food safety and security in this country, especially Smithfield, because of the EATS Act that Smithfield is trying to get passed in Congress that would nullify so many of the state agriculture laws across America and basically federalize agriculture.
And what does that mean for consumers when we go to the grocery store and choose what we're going to eat?
Well, I think so many people have been asleep at the wheel for years. COVID probably changed that when people realized that meat was not on the shelves or there was no toilet paper, whatever the case may have been. They started doing their homework and seeing where their food came from. Personally, I go to Whole Foods. I buy a lot there. If you look under the GAP system, Global Animal Partnership, the way that they scale and grade the meat there, it's terrific. I also buy from folks like Will Harris at White Oak Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia, probably the most humane farm in America and has the best product I've ever eaten. as far as the grass-fed beef and others are concerned. And then, you think about whether you're buying hamburger meat that came from a piece of 100 different cows when it's being ground at the butcher, or did it come from one cow? There's a danger for food safety if it's a piece of meat that was thrown in the pile after many carcasses were cut and ground up, and you could have a much greater chance of getting something like mad cow disease if that came back big, and other things, hoof and mouth disease, that can really be harmful to humans and animals. So there are things like that people just don't think about. That's what I think about. I've seen just about every type of major commodity raised meat slaughtered in person. I personally eat more beef than anything. I like beef, but to me, it's the most humane thing I've seen slaughtered. And if you measure animal welfare also by the number of lives, I think it takes 136 chickens to equal one cow. So if you measure things that way, which I do look at things sometimes that way, that's the way I approach it, and would give advice that others would at least try to check it out and see what you think for yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's true. There are options. There are farmers markets. There are farm to table eating establishments, restaurants. There are go outside your comfort zone and find the farms that are near you. I go to a local farm for my meat. People do have choices, and I think what we're saying is look to buy your food as close as possible to where it was produced or raised or grown, and
Yep,
that helps.
it really is. It's buy local. There are two restaurants in Washington. I live here in Washington. The organization is based in Nebraska, but I live in Washington D.C. And farmers and distillers, fishers and farmers, and there's a third one, founding farmers, I believe, that are all farm to table here. Great. I believe that some of the farmers unions and maybe the Dakotas have a stake or own those restaurants, and I see them all across the country, just like Joseph DeQuee in Roanoke, Indiana. It's a great place if you ever check that out for Wagyu beef. So farm to table is the way to go on that end of things, as well as the grocery side and when you're in the retail side as well.
And I think consumers have to look, take a few minutes to actually look, read the labels, see where things are being produced, and then make choices after they understand where is their food coming from as best they can,
Right.
because we don't really know. Um, what what are the so I think it's the U.S. Department of Agriculture that makes policy about beef. It's true about dairy, about milk, and we're going to see that it's a little bit true about fishing. Um, what do you think are the changes that need to happen at the U.S. Department of Agriculture for the life of ranchers and people who raise cattle to be better, make their lives better, give them a more fair price?
Well, no matter who gets elected president next week, I think we need someone different than Tom Vilsack as the Secretary of Agriculture. To me, he is the swampiest person in all of Washington, D.C. He was secretary for 8 years. He went to the dairy checkoff for 4 years, making $1 million a year. And then he came back to the USDA to be secretary again. There are tremendous problems, as we discussed before, with the dairy checkoffs. And I think there needs to be tremendous reform that the secretary could do. Congress is trying to act, but the powerful dairy checkoff lobby and beef checkoff lobby have really hindered things there. It's unfortunate that Vilsack actually agrees with a lot of the Republican members of Congress on the EATS Act and the federalization of agriculture and nullifying some of the state laws like Prop 12 in California. That would be the most important thing, to be quite honest. Beyond that, we really need a house clean of people who are bureaucrats there that have been there and really stalled policy from both sides of the aisle. This is not one administration or the other. This is all of them since I've been here on both sides of the aisle. And it doesn't change much. I do think Sonny Perdue did a good job with some of the dairy checkoff reports, but the conflict that we see there exists now. And whoever it is, either side of the aisle, I think we'd have somebody new in there that could really make change and make a difference. I think also people advocating their positions with the USDA. You can call the USDA as an American citizen. It's a government agency, and have to talk to every American. It's not just your specific state or district like Congress. So I would call the USDA and go online and really learn about the programs and what they're doing, and give your thoughts about things when you learn about the food system and what you're buying as well.
It's unbelievable to me how much money is actually through this check off, how much money is taken out of the farmers or ranchers' check before they even get it.
It is.
I mean, these are deductions that hurt family farmers and ranchers.
They do. Every farmer has to pay $1 a cow a head. There's also, if you have dairy cows, you pay the $1 a cow when you sell it, and on the milk, and then you pay for pork. I think it's 40 or 50 cents a hog. Poultry has no checkoff, and their numbers have skyrocketed over the last 30, 40 years in basically consumption and demand. And then all of those that have a checkoff, they have gone downhill. So I think that says the initial thought of marketing being done by the government and these commodities was a good idea is really been proven to be a terrible idea. And there's the evidence because of poultry versus those that have checkoffs that, the proof is right there.
Yep. I wanted to ask you about lobbying because you've done a lot. You've had a hand in a whole bunch of different kinds of federal and state legislation. There's so many groups that want to lobby Congress or a particular agency, grassroots groups that are really upset about a particular issue, whether that's farmers or veterans or victims of chemical poisoning, toxic chemicals in water, the family court system. So there are people that have been really damaged by government policy, and they talk about wanting to change things and lobby government, but they really don't know how. Do you have any advice for those groups that do want to lobby Congress to make changes in laws or in definitions?
Absolutely. I think, the two things that are most important, and I was here on Capitol Hill all during COVID, are proximity and persistence. Being here physically, you break through the noise, even if it's that you live in Kansas or you live in New York and you just make a trip for a day or two to come meet your member of Congress. You can also do that in their districts or in their states, and the office is there, but it's a lot easier usually to get in with the policy people because the policy people are based in Washington, D.C., and what they call the caseworkers, or if you're trying to get into the military academy, that sort of stuff is what is handled by the folks in the district and state offices. So that calling the member of Congress, social media is picking up more and more today, but I do think that really calling and in person means the most. A letter written on your own letterhead, not some form canned letter, really makes a difference too, and they pay attention to that a lot more as well. And I think just, stay at it. If you believe in it and on the right side of the issue and believe you can win, don't give up. It's going to take a while. It's Congress. It's the way things work, but you'll get there. And I've seen so many things move along the way. It does encourage me that there is hope for some of these issues we're all talking about, especially today more than ever.
I'm glad you feel hopeful. And my last question is, what can consumers do differently to help farmers and ranchers and fishers? What
I think
should they do different Monday morning?
Well, I think, when you wake up Monday morning, look at what you're eating. Look at breakfast, look at the back of the carton, whatever it is. I would suggest things like organic milk. There is an organic trade association. Check them out. All of the farms and vendors they have. I've worked a lot with them. Also, the American Grass Fed Association. Buy those top products if you can, and you can afford it. I know a lot of people can't. But what can you afford versus the long-term damage to your own health that you're basically externalizing the cost to later in life? And I didn't know that the first probably 30 years of my life, but the last 15, I've sort of lived by that. And it's definitely made a difference in my health.
I have done a similar thing and have produced a 6'3", very healthy young man as my son. So we've been doing organic food for as long as possible. And you do have to make choices about what you can afford. Marty Irby, thank you so much. Is there any last thoughts you want to leave with this audience about the food industry and making it more fair access to healthier food?
Well, just support your local farmers, the farmers markets, those farm to table type restaurants, and call your members of Congress. You can call them whatever the issue is and whatever you want to say at 202-224-3121. It's 202-224-3121. And I just share that because most folks want to know and don't have to go look it up. You do have to go if you want to really communicate on any issue. You can go to an agency, but just go to the White House's website. They'll take an email on any topic, and I feel like I've gotten more done in the past when you go from the top down and flood the White House. I broke Jen Psaki's email one time where the press couldn't even get pressed through. So sometimes you have to go to drastic measures. That was over the wild horses, by the way, but you get things done. So I would, no matter who's in there, just send the messages to the White House.
Brilliant. Perfectly said. Thank you so much, Marty Irby. This is the end of episode 7. We will be back with one more episode on our food system, and then we'll head off into other topics. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lynn.